Welcome to the Information Security Forum videocast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and today we're featuring ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin in conversation with Helaine Leggat, who lives and works in Australia as principal lawyer and head of cyberlaw practice at Sladen Legal. She is an internationally recognized global expert in managing information and is specialized in cyberlaw, cybersecurity, data privacy, and governance since 2000. In this interview, Helaine discusses GDPR, the shift of power from nation-states to individual actors and business enterprises, the corporate appetite for increasing amounts of data, and more.
Helaine, very nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. One of the things that you say that really intrigues me in your work is that you see power shifting from nation-states to organizations and individuals, and businesses becoming very much more powerful because of the amount of data that they collect and evaluate. In the past, of course, we've had some regulatory environment that has managed that. What can we expect, though, from a legal and regulatory perspective in the coming years, given those changes that we're seeing?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk to your community about it, because what concerns me is that the structures of legal authority and power that we've relied on for literally thousands of years across the world has become corrupted. It's lost the force and structure that we've relied on. So law always goes to certainty. That's why we use precedent. Mm-hmm. But it seems that we need to find a new way through. So my point is, if it's how do we do it, we need to look at what we've got, what has worked for all of those thousands of years, for humanity in general, across all of the many jurisdictions, and say what worked, and essentially to project that forward. So much of the work I do is not litigation. It's projecting law forward and what I call using the best forward-thinking legal logic to try and say, what does this mean? How do we apply that then? And a good example is if you consider the unauthorized access, right, hacking. Mm-hmm. That was an idea that came out of trespass in the law of property.
Right.
So they've reinterpreted an old, what was a crime, or it might have been a delict too, into the new world. And the Talon work, which was done in Estonia around 2007, did exactly that. It said international law does apply to cyberspace, and then they come up with these 95-old rules that say, this is how, and this is what you can do, and this is what matters. And we need to do that with other laws, with national laws, to get back to the structure we've got and find a way of using it in new circumstances. And law is about people, so this is what we do. So while some of the statements I make in terms of becoming less sedentary or less, we're not reactive enough, or rather we do react, we're not proactive.
Right.
I think we need to become proactive in using existing law to find new ways through this and to work together as nations to find the answers. And the questions come from the kind of communities that you have. Mm-hmm. There's those incredible businesses in all those countries across the world. I think that's the key to the secret.
So this whole idea that you've just been talking about of using the law to try to anticipate, to come up with new laws effectively that really allow for us to moderate some of the ways in which we're seeing future developments is very interesting. And I remember that not that long ago when I was talking to the working party that was working on GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, across the EU, one of the questions they kept putting to me was, are we getting it right? Are we future-proofing this particular piece of legislation sufficiently? And I found that a very difficult question to answer, because anticipating the future is hard enough. Trying to then put in place some legal and regulatory guidelines that we can abide by going into the future, to me seemed at that time, and I think still, not an impossible ask, but certainly a very difficult one. What's your response to that?
I agree with you completely. By the time you've been through a process as the working party, and that whole GDPR process took years. It took years, and it came off a 30-year-old base. It's too little, too late. People in legal circles, and particularly academic circles, say it's too late. You can't, for example, have something like this right to erasure if you've got blockchain technology. It's not possible to, well, it is, but it's impractical to go down and take out little pieces from it. It's not. It's a standard, and I think that it is useful, and it's good, and it's what I try to do in other ways to say, let's find a standard of behavior, because that's really what law is about, standards of behavior, the norms within societies at particular times. But we do need to project forward. An example I have that I found interesting when I had to requalify to practice law after immigrating to Australia was I had to do property law.
Right.
It's very different. The torrent system is very different. And the very first lecture I went into, the lecturer put forward this scenario, and he said, there is a man and he's riding his bicycle, he gets hit by a car, and his arm is chopped off. Boom, the arm is lying in the road over there, and he's full of adrenaline, so he's got the stamina to get up, and he wants to pick up his arm, and he thinks he'll go off to hospital and have someone stitch it on. But along comes a third party, picks up the arm and walks off. So the question is, can the man get his arm back? And the answer is no.
Right.
Because when your body parts are severed, you don't own them. They don't belong to you.
Right.
And there are other policies, they're policy decisions in terms of other body parts where, for example, if some sick body part is used to make some new medicine, they won't let the donor of that body part necessarily have any of the profits from the new creation. But it's a good idea in theory, because otherwise it would make it difficult. People wouldn't want to invest money in designing new drugs or developing new drugs, because they would know that they have to share the money with other people. So policy decisions are good. But to get back to IT and theory and humanity, the thing is, what if you have a chip implanted in that arm?
Right.
Who owns that? What do we do with that? In property law again, if I build my house on your piece of land because I made a mistake, you actually end up being the owner of that house. So are we going to follow property law further into this process of how we interpret it? If someone else has that arm with my chip transplanted onto them, do they become the owner of the information on the chip? Some of them are silly examples, but they're the kind of issues that are, they're there already, and we just need to learn how to reuse them.
It's interesting that you put it that way, because that is really, I suppose, making it very concrete, some of the challenges that we face in this space. Let me further complicate it for you, if I may. Okay. So let's stay with the chip in the arm, for instance. That is gathering information, sharing information. It may well be spreading it across social media. Now, if we think about that from a legislative standpoint, that again is introducing the notion of territory. Where does the information reside? And so therefore, which jurisdiction does it fall under? How do we really, because that applies to things like cloud computing, it applies to social media, it applies to all of the things that we somewhat take for granted today. So again, from a legislative standpoint, from a regulatory perspective perhaps, how can we handle that one?
In some respects it's been done already. So you'll find some countries, Russia's one, I think China's another, where they say this is all sovereign. So for example, personal property or other personal information of a Russian citizen belongs in Russia and can't leave. China similarly, so that's why you'll find some of the big countries, I forget if it's Apple or Google, one of them is going in round about an hour to actually establish data centers there, so that they can actually give the country what it needs in terms of retaining ownership of all of their PI to all of their people. Right. It just shows how important this kind of information is. I guess in other cases you'd have instances where people could agree. So for example, in the electronic laws that we've got, and they come out of UNCITRAL, International Trade Organization, so they say we'll recognize all of this, and this is how international agreements will be entered into online. And they allow, they create basic default rules, but they allow the parties to the contract to change the terms. And again, people just don't look to do that. They should, because it's powerful when you can say, it's all very well you tell me that's how it's going to operate, but I prefer to do it this way. And it's something we should be using now in many other circumstances. So they could agree to say, well, you and I are going to enter into some arrangement. You might be company A, I'll be company B, or individuals or whatever. And we will decide where we're going to do things, and we'll decide the terms on how that will operate. Because law always has, depending on what's involved, say it's a sale, you'll have a buyer, a seller, a thing, and a price, and then you might say when you're going to deliver it and all the other finer details, but there are essential criteria that you have to deal with. So maybe countries will decide, maybe people will decide. But I think that we should start thinking about those things now, because the truth is, the way the political system works is you have politicians, they've got an idea, they go out, they talk their talk, and they convince people, and then they're voted into power. So they're supposed to legislate based on whatever those policies were. So policy results in law. Law will then have regulations and all sorts of other things. It goes back into the community, and then corporate citizens actually have to have their own policies which fall under that umbrella. And then, for example, a privacy policy. This is our corporation's view, this is how we respect and handle things. And then internally they need to say, in order to demonstrate my compliance with that law, this is how I go about it. So you have all the internal controls that the members of this organization work with.
So we're talking about an environment that's very much more based on negotiation, if I could put it that way.
I think it can be, and that's what I was talking about earlier, because if you look at what happened in the 1650s, when Lex Mercatoria, the law of the merchants, arose, it was exactly that. I mean, they were traveling from one country to another across Europe and across Asia, and they had different rules, exactly as we did today. But the merchants, the traders, decided how they were going to do things, what was the currency, and they came to a commercial arrangement that was based on the law of contract. And I think we can do that very powerfully today. There are lots of pointers if we just think creatively.
But let me just go into that in a bit more detail, because I'm very interested in this point, because let's look at it from the individual standpoint. Now, we've seen recently, of course, no end of noise around things like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and so on. Your point about the contract that exists between the individual, if you like, and the corporation. So in this case, let's say between me and Facebook. Do I really have any power? Am I really able to change the way in which Facebook uses my data as an individual?
To a limited extent. And there's a lot to read as to what the terms are. You need to separate it. Once you give them permission to do things, they can do the things they say they will. And that's the deal that you need to negotiate before you get into it. And that's what people don't do enough of. Most people have never read those things. So if you read all of that carefully, you know what you're in for. You are usually given choice. So choice is one of the primary principles in privacy that's in every privacy law across the world. So you're allowed to, you would basically do it by changing your options and your settings.
Right.
So limited choice, but once they've got it, not unless there's something like the Cambridge Analytica case, and then there's such a response, an outcry from the public that says this is not on. And that's actually the kind of power that we should be using now. Because I think the contention between what I call the social contract, which is a different issue, that goes back to feudal times when you have the peasants who couldn't look after themselves said to the lord and master, well, I'll dig in your fields and I'll have some of your crops and you'll protect me. We should be doing that too. That relationship between government and the individual people needs to be reassessed, because we're dropping action into an executive layer and there's no oversight and we're losing the separation of powers.
So look forward for us. So take a sort of 3 to 5 year, maybe even a 10-year view if you can. How do you see things changing, both from a regulatory standpoint, but also, of course, from a cyber enablement perspective, because that's what we're talking about. And I guess over that period, we will see realities such as artificial intelligence really coming into their own. How do we legislate in that kind of environment where the machine is making the decisions?
Well, I'm not sure that I have those answers. I think that we need to listen to a lot of people, and we need to have this conversation with many more people. What I see is what I was talking about, is this insatiable appetite for collecting information. Everybody wants to own it. Some people used to talk about the what the data's the new oil, whatever the cliches are. Everybody's collecting it. And the things that are really concerning is they are collecting it now, but what will they do with it in future? So years ago, I had a hard drive collapse. I took it to all kinds of data, recovery people. They could not fix it. 3 years later, I took it back. I got all my data back. So we can't even begin to say what's going to happen. And frankly, I opted out of one of the new situations in Australia where we have something called My Health Records Act. So the idea is all of your health records go into a pool so that everybody in the medical profession can access it nice and easy. They know what happened before, et cetera, et cetera. And it was based on you will be in unless you opt out in 3 months. And I was asked publicly, did I opt out? And I said, yes, I did. And what was the reason? The reason is it's about privacy in the real sense. And we need to think often about the distinction between personal information, where that takes you and what it allows, and privacy in the old sense of choice, the right to be left alone, and communications privacy, which is what the real crypto people work with. So there are different aspects of privacy. There are others as well under law. But I would like to get input from lots of people, which is why I talk at places like this to say, what do you think? I might be able to prompt a thought. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I will. Hopefully I can dig out some good ideas that are in law already, because people don't change that much. Societies have learned to survive through cooperation. We've had times when you have dictators, times when you've had lots of democracy. It seems to work different places, different times, different cultures. I'm hoping that now that the world is a global world, we can find a global consensus of sorts. But it's apparent to me now that we can't rely on government to do that, because they're all pulling back, doing their own things, going insular and putting up the walls of sovereignty and that sort of thing.
Mm. And that also is a big shift, isn't it?
It's
huge. This whole thing of governments, taking things back effectively. And so, to this point about there should be more collaboration, cooperation, getting a groundswell effectively of views around how we can operate in this changing environment. What exactly do you think organisations such as the ISF, for instance, might be able to do to assist in that?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I've got a very clear answer. I think you can do a lot. You've got the cream of the crop of the world's best organizations, the most successful, solid, the best there is. Mm-hmm. The best there is across every sector, the best there is, I don't even know how many nations they come from, but lots. Yeah. I was sitting in on one of the threat erosion workshops there, and I had accents from this country and that country, and this was at one table, all these people. It's fantastic. So you can get input around these sort of issues. What do you think? And all these security people actually work with laws. They all are fairly knowledgeable about what they need to deal with. I would like to up that layer, and I would like to look forward. And I think the way to do that is to continue this conversation. So hopefully my involvement here today will get us to the next stage where we can say, let's do what I suggested. Let's say, this industry, what laws apply? How do you rationalize that into actions that need to happen? Mm-hmm. So you've got something solid. What standards, best practices, frameworks, and codes of conduct do you use to support that, to demonstrate that compliance with law? And then how do we, once we've established that solid, agreed foundation across the global society, then look forward to say, this is how we're going to do it? Because we can do it. We can do it. There is enough commonality in the national laws, certainly of Western states, and I even looked at China recently. They allow the same sort of things, even, for example, in self-defense. Mm-hmm. We apply it in other areas of life. Why not here? But what does it mean, and how do we do it, and how do we tackle it so that we can agree that if I do this, it's how we all play on the football field. Because if you don't play well, you need to get a yellow card or a red card and be sent off to the sin bin. Mm-hmm. But your community can do it. Your community can make a difference to the way the world works today. So I would really like to see you do that.
Helaine, thank you very much indeed for stopping by and sharing some of those thoughts. And I look forward to continuing the conversation along the lines that you've just outlined. So thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for tuning in to our videocast with Steve Durbin in conversation with Helaine Leggat. For more videocasts, podcasts, and other resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.